Omar, good to have you. President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu are presenting a very optimistic tone for this plan. How likely is Hamas to share that view?
Yeah, it's difficult to assess it at this point. I mean, there are some positive elements in this plan. It talks about how there's not going to be annexation of Gaza, how there's not going to be forced ethnic cleansing. But there is a poison pill in this deal, which basically says that Israel gets to indefinitely occupy a so-called security perimeter inside Gaza with no timeline for withdrawal. And basically, Israel gets to decide on its own when it might feel like leaving, which might in fact never happen. And in that sense, it is reproducing not just a problem that has existed in Gaza, but a problem that has existed in the entire dynamic between Palestine and Israel, which is that Palestinians are being asked once again to live as a captive population under complete and total Israeli control and domination with no prospect for being a free people in their own country. And that is simply a recipe for long-term failure. It is difficult to imagine what incentive Hamas has to accept that in the short term, despite what I'm sure is enormous diplomatic pressure against them. But if Palestinians are being asked once again to simply live under Israeli domination, I think there's every incentive to reject that. And so I don't see this certainly as a path for anything positive in the long term, at least.
Now, despite that, that is something that may very well play well to Prime Minister Netanyahu's coalition, but this will still be a big challenge to sell to his cabinet when he returns to Israel. With that as one of the biggest moving parts here before this deal is approved, how likely is it to go through?
Yeah, there's, certainly Netanyahu's coalition would not be happy with the prospect that Gaza is not going to be taken over. This is what his coalition has been talking about for a very long time. Smotrich, his finance minister, recently talked about how the demolition phase is over and now it's time to reconstruct Gaza and for Israel to take it over and make money off of it. So that putting an end to those dreams is certainly going to be a tough sell. But ultimately, we're talking about something much bigger than simply appeasing the fanatical right people on to the right of Netanyahu. I think Netanyahu inserted language in there that ensures indefinite Israeli dominance of Gaza because he knows that's going to make it very likely for Palestinians to actually reject that prospect. And he's even talking about, when you look at the elements of who could govern Gaza, we're having an entire conversation about a so-called board of peace that is going to include people like Tony Blair and Donald Trump. Those are people with records that are frankly nothing short of criminal towards the region. Tony Blair, of course, an architect of the invasion of Iraq and the lies that was based on and the lives that were destroyed as a result. And Donald Trump himself is someone who's endorsed illegal settlements, endorsed Israel's illegal takeover of the Syrian Golan Heights, the granting of Jerusalem over to Israel, and just one atrocity after another. The idea that they can name this a board of peace is frankly Orwellian, and it doesn't bode well for the possibility of anything succeeding coming out of this process.
Well, and as Tarek, our correspondent in Gaza, mentioned, people in Gaza are focused on surviving right now. This, again, seems like another peace deal, another ceasefire plan that they don't have a say in, despite the fact that they are very much bearing the brunt of this war at this point. How do we get them involved in one of these ceasefire plans and deals?
That is exactly the critical question, is what say do the people of Gaza have? And frankly, I think right now at the rate of this genocide, with a level of starvation that Israel has imposed on Gaza, with killing nearly 100 people every single day, with snipers taking out Palestinian children, there might be a level of desperation in Gaza of people who just want the killing and the starvation to stop, that I wouldn't be surprised if there was some level of support for a ceasefire at any cost. But again, once that killing ends, people ultimately have an innate desire to be a free people. And as long as that is being denied to Palestinians, as is the case right now, this simply cannot succeed. We can't continue with this mindset of treating Palestinians as subjects that can be ruled by Israel or ruled by any foreign powers that get imposed on them. This is ultimately going to have to be up to the Palestinian people to govern themselves and to live as a free people in their own land. And until that is recognized, I'm afraid we're going to be stuck in a cycle that simply drags us towards an inevitable round of violence again in the future, even if everyone at this moment is desperate to give the people of Gaza some relief and people just want an opportunity to not watch their lives being destroyed before their eyes. And we have to recognize that you can't just solve this problem short term by imposing absurd conditions in exchange for a ceasefire when you need to be dealing with the underlying problem, and that is the denial of freedom for Palestinians.
Right. And Omar, point 19 goes to this. It suggests that if everything goes according to plan in this deal, there is a path here for Palestinian statehood. How surprising was that to you, given what we've heard from these two leaders the past week at the UN General Assembly while this surge for Palestinian statehood was coming forward?
Yeah, we should not miss the contradiction there. On the one hand, the plan opens up the possibility for a Palestinian state. Meanwhile, Netanyahu, who's sitting there endorsing that plan standing next to Trump, is making it very clear that he will never accept a Palestinian state. So he's undermining that supposed endorsement right then and there. And he's talking about how the Palestinian Authority must meet certain conditions before they allow them to govern. Those conditions include Palestinians not going to the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice to seek accountability for Israeli crimes against Palestinians. Netanyahu is basically saying that a condition for them to recognize and allow for any Palestinian leadership to flourish, that leadership has to be subservient to Israel and has to ultimately make clear that they will never challenge Israel in any meaningful sense. That is not Palestinian independence and self-determination. That is a view that sees Palestinians as less than. And as long as Israel continues to see Palestinians as people who are less deserving of freedom, equality, and rights than Israelis, we are stuck in a dynamic that is unfortunately going to guarantee future violence inevitably.
Now, Omar, there's a new poll from the New York Times that says that support for Israel by American voters is on the decline because of what's happening in this war in Gaza. How likely is this to play out politically for Donald Trump? How is it likely to play out, rather?
There is a huge shift happening right now in American public opinion that should not be ignored. Americans are sick and tired of watching their tax dollars being used in order to fund a foreign country's war crimes. That is what they're witnessing day in and day out. Whether that's going to play out in the short term in a way that applies meaningful pressure on Donald Trump to change his behavior continues to be an unknown possibility, because Trump is deeply well established within pro-Israel circles in the United States. He has the funding and the support of significant pro-Israel forces and the Israel lobby. I don't know whether that's going to lead to a change in his policy. But in the long term, there's no question about the fact that America is moving in a direction where this policy of a blank check for Israel to do whatever it wants is simply unsustainable. People are waking up to it, they're understanding it, and we're going to see more and more significant political challenges for people who pursue this policy of a blank check towards Israel. So Donald Trump may be feeling the pressure and the heat. Whether we're going to see enough of a change is unknown, but there's no question that this support is inevitably going to come to a significant change in the foreseeable future if the trends continue, as every poll seems to be suggesting. Our things are moving in a direction where Americans are more and more aware of what Israel's conduct is, and they know that they don't represent the values that Americans themselves profess and talk about. Freedom and democracy and human rights are what America says are supposed to be animating American policy, and that's in deep and sharp contrast to what Israel is doing with American money and diplomatic support.
Okay, Omar Badr, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.